Hi there. Are you one of those parents who struggles to teach your kiddos the math problems? Do you struggle with Common Core math? Well, in this series, I'm going to go through some of the standards that are in the Common Core math and break them down for you and help you to understand what your child is learning in school, because you can teach them the standard algorithm, and I know that they're learning things differently than what you or how you were taught. But trust me, it's because their brains think differently. But I'm going to break it down for you and help it make sense to you. So if this is you, keep watching. So in today's math problem, we are going to be going through a standard that is in the third grade strand. So in third grade, the very first standard that students are going to need to be able to do is round numbers to the tens place value and the hundreds place value. The standard sounds way more complicated than that, but that is basically the gist of it. They need to be able to round to the nearest 10 and the nearest 100. And trust me, it is pretty simple, and we're going to go through the basics of that. So if you guys are ready, come on with me. So let's go through what students will be taught from their teacher. So typically they are going to see a chart that looks like this, that walks them through how to round in 3 easy steps. So the first step that they will see is typically is finding the rounding place value. So whether your child is rounding to the tens place value or the 100s place value, their teacher will have them underline that value. So for this example, we are going to round to the nearest 10. So they rounded that, they underlined that for us already. They underlined the 2. So the second step that your teacher will have the student do is they will have them look at the value of the digit next door. So the ones place value or the tens place value if they're rounding to 100. And they will have them put a box around it. This will make it easier for them to see that number, and it'll help a lot more in the next step, which the very last step, they're going to have them ask themselves this question of, is this number lower than 4 or is it above 5? So if it is a number that's 4 or less, then they will do what they call let it rest. That's how I teach my kids, is let it rest. Or if it's more than 5, which in this case it is, then they will raise the score. So all that means is that either the value that you underline is either going to rest or it's going to increase by 1 point value. So in this case, we are going to increase that value. So this is a 2, so it'll increase to 3, and then everything behind it goes to 0. So the new number would be 530. So this is a really easy way for the teacher to explain it to the kids, and then typically they go through some examples with the students. So they'll give them numbers and they'll have them practice that skill. So you can do that with your students at home too, is you can just give them numbers and have them practice that skill at home to see how well they understand rounding. So let's go ahead. I'm going to share my screen with you again, and we're going to go to a whiteboard option this time. And we'll just give an example of if we have the number 91. So if you were telling your student to round this number to the nearest 10 or the nearest 100, they should be able to do it either one. So if they were rounding this number to the nearest 10, they would underline the 9 and they would box the 1. And then the third step is that they would ask themselves, is 1 4 or less or 5 or more? And it is 4 or less, so that means that they are going to raise, like they're not going to raise the score, they're just going to let it rest. So that means that the 9 stays the same, and then everything behind it turns to 0. So you can do this exact same strategy with rounding to the nearest 100. But in this case, 0, it still has a value. So you can teach your child that not a 0 is a value. So they will underline the 0 in the hundreds place value, and they will box the 9, and they'll ask the same question. Is this 4 or less or 5 or more? In this case, it's 5 or more, so it's going to raise that score, and then the new number, that 0, goes to 1, and then everything behind it goes to 0. So you can give your child examples just like this to help them understand place value. So the biggest thing that I like to tell my students in the classroom is I like to give them real world examples. Why do I need to know this math? Sometimes we are teaching math skills because that's a base for a skill that they are going to be needing in the future. But in this case, rounding is directly something that they will need to be able to use in their future. With taxes, we use rounding. When you go to the gas station to get gas, they use rounding. When you go to the grocery store and you're trying to figure out if you have enough money or trying to budget your spending, you can use rounding to be able to manage your money. You can use rounding if you were a caterer or in that sort of field. They use rounding all the time to figure out how many people they will need to make food for. So rounding is definitely a skill that students will need to be able to use, and you can explain that to your child as well. And I always like to do that with my students as well. So that was this week's video. I hope you come back next week where we will take another math standard and we'll break it down together and we'll make sense of it. Until next time, see you later. Bye.